Good morning, everyone. Um, I've titled my talk this morning, Acharemot, which is the name of this week's Torah portion, and Passover. Where have all the flowers gone? Acharemot, this week's Torah portion that leads into Passover this year, begins as the Passover night begins, with a retelling of horrifying killing of children. Moses, in the Torah portion, receives a divine vision, perhaps an enlightenment moment of how to live and function in a world permeated by death, even of beloved and children. Literally, Acharei Mot means after the death, referring to the killing of Moses' nephews, Aaron's sons, who were burnt alive by the God they were instructed to worship and serve at the altar as they performed their young priestly duties. Toyrah revisits this shocking, horrifying, unfair death of young people killed in service of inherited narratives and beliefs. It's also horrifying and prescient throughout the world, throughout time, and of course in our time today, that the Jewish tradition interprets the whole thing spiritually. Spiritual lessons, spiritual meanings. The retelling of the story in this chapter of Torah leads into the atonement practices for Yom Kippur, suggesting that the killing of the sons can be atoned for by ascetic spiritual practices. In previous years, I've enjoyed exploring spiritual meanings to this story, finding parallel stories in Eastern religions about encountering the death of children. It's tempting to do that this year, but in honor of all the children who are being killed, I won't. This year, I can't. I fear that doing so will somehow justify or nullify what's actually going on. Sometimes it works to put the tragedies of our days in grand mythic terms. Sometimes, though, it can become an excuse for not taking responsibility to fix what is ours to fix. Since October 7th, we've been overwhelmed by images of babies and children kidnapped and killed on October 7th by Hamas, and continuing now for more than 6 months by Israel's continuous killing of Palestinian babies, destruction of their homes and families in Gaza and throughout Palestine. And now, in the midst of all this, we're called upon to celebrate Passover, the holiday of our liberation. This is an opportunity to find our voices at our tables, in our synagogues and communities. Throughout the Jewish tradition, the exile in Egypt is spoken about as an exile of the word. And the main practice of Passover is to come out of Egypt, to experience coming out of Egypt ourselves. This means coming out of our muteness as a community, within our families and in the world. It means speaking out in our own names for the values that we hold dear. Many Israeli Jews are doing this, and I'm in touch with them through many different peacemaker circles. What they're trying to do and what we need to do is to find ways of helping everyone break through the trauma that keeps us stuck in the past pain so we can come back to the present moment, so we can actually affect what's going on today. Here are some ways during Passover that we can bring our voices out of exile and shout at our tables, protect children in our world from harm, bring peace to our world. So I'm going to go through some practices that we can really invite and use at our Passover tables. And of course, many of them when the children have gone off to bed. So I'm going to start with a really hardcore topic to discuss. Every generation adds its own experience and insights to the meaning and path of liberation. Right in the Haggadah, it's like, this is what we're supposed to do. On the Passover night, as retold in the Torah and reenacted tonight all over the world, enslaved peoples huddled in their homes while genocide was committed against the metaphoric Egyptian people. Mitzrayim, translated in the Torah as Egypt, refers to a constricted place. What is it that happens in a constricted place? First, the killing of the firstborn of the Israelites, and then the killing of the firstborn of the Egyptians. There's no distinction. Mitzrayim, the place that we are supposed to come out of on this Passover night over and over every year, that is the place where genocide is committed. That is the place where children are slain. Both of these genocides are generated by the same God. This is called the slaying of the firstborn. Let's stop playing with that and say, wait a minute, that's Mitzrayim. Where in me does this justification of slaying of the firstborn arise? What are other ways we can find to continue our liberation story? That is what this is about. On the Passover night, the enslaved peoples called Ivri, right, Hebrew, which means boundary crosser, people who've crossed the river. We were protected, they were protected because they slayed animals and marked their thresholds with blood. So on that night, they didn't cross the threshold. They weren't yet Ivri. They had to cross out of this place where you huddle silently when children are being slayed. That is what we need to come out of. That is this journey. And there's so many ways in the Seder, the order of this process of coming out of that place where you can justify the killing of children. There's many amazing rituals to do that during the Seder. The first one is the maror, right? So it's said specifically in Torah that eating maror, eating bitter herbs, is one of the three core mitzvot actions that are supposed to bring us closer to reenacting what happened on that Passover night. I found sources as old as the Talmud, 1,500 years ago, and of course from the Buddha, 2,500 years ago, that talk about, that give us instructions about what we can do with this maror. In the Talmud section on Passover called Pesachim, the instruction is to slowly chew the bitter herb that we place on the Seder plate. It's an eating meditation. What brings us closer to liberation, what brings us, how we do this mitzvah, is to slowly chew and transform the suffering into something else. And throughout the Passover Seder, as it's set forth in our tradition, this is about transforming suffering. This is about recognizing when our liberation comes at the expense of other people's suffering and turning it around. So this is how we come out of that place of exile. Feel the bitterness of the enslavement. Feel the bitterness of the slaying of the Egyptian babies. Chewing and letting your own energy, letting your own deepest values and aspirations, what you see as the meaning of being Jewish in the world today, let that transform our bitterness. So this, starting with the maror, it's a recognition that it's the bitterness in our very mouths that can lead us to ourselves doing the horrendous acts that the story recounts. So we chew so that we are really transforming the bitterness within ourselves, within our mouths. And Pesach means the mouth of conversing, the mouth of speaking in conversation to others. So we have to chew until we really can feel that the bitterness in our mouths that comes from our hearts, that comes from our fear and our trauma, that it's transforming so that our liberation becomes a liberation in the way we speak about these things, that we could speak about these horrors without blaming and shaming. We could speak about it as this is what happens when we are all stuck in Mitzrayim and we chew and chew the maror until we experience this transformation. It's a similar practice with the matzah. Um, it is said in very old texts that matzah itself has a healing power, and that this is the transformative, also the representative of the transformative power that is on the Seder plate and is part of our ritual. In the Passover story, right, the enslaved peoples ate matzah in a rush of fear and anxiety. This night is different. We can sit and slowly chew each bite of matzah. We can recline and slowly chew, envisioning our chewing and our bodies as temples of transformation. Slowly and deliberately, we chew the matzah that came from the place of enslavement. With each bite and chew, we digest, we metabolize the fear and the anxiety that have paralyzed us in all genocides. We mourn. We mourn that we didn't know how to argue with and stop the gods committing genocide in our names. And as we slowly chew, we feel the fear and the anxiety transform into deep grief and regret. Let our tears flow. Weren't the Israelites crying when they're in their darkness and not knowing what's happening? And if any of this is going to actually bear fruition, let the tears flow. And as we slowly chew, allow the fear and anxiety, allow the trauma to come alive in the form of grief, in form of the alive energy of grief. And as we slowly chew the matzah, the dryness, and we're mixing it with our saliva so it's getting wet, maybe it's even getting a little tasty, we transform and metabolize the grief into new possibility. The people who inspire me so much in doing this is the Israeli-Palestinian bereaved families for peace, who say our grief is our greatest strength. That is what keeps them together. We metabolize our grief and our fear to transform them into peacemaking. We acknowledge the suffering upon which our liberation is based and use that awareness to transform how we are in the world today. With the story of the 4 children in the Haggadah, we can completely transform how we tell that story. We must. There's no evil child or wise child or stupid child. No, there are just children, wounded children in the world and inside of us. And this is a night where we say, ask all your questions, ask any question. Any question. We welcome in all parts of ourselves. And the more we can make space in our hearts for any question that any child asks, for any question that our own wounded inner children ask, the more we begin to heal ourselves. And another one is the whole narration of the story, permission to narrate. Freedom means that every one of us at our table, people who agree with what I'm saying and people who are horrified by what I'm saying, can we sit together at the table and give each other permission to narrate? That is coming out of Mitzrayim, right? Mitzrayim is the place of domination. Human domination is so strong that the people who are dominated are actually enslaved. So how do we come out of that? It's by not becoming enslavers ourselves, right? It's by creating the spaciousness where we sit around a table, and it's the table in our houses, and it's the table in our congresses, and it's the table uh, in the streets. There are seders in the streets this year. I'm actually going to one tomorrow night, Tuesday night, at the Brooklyn Public Library, 5:30 if you're in New York City. We sit together at the table. And even if we're hearing things that are hard, we sit and we grant every people permission to narrate. And this expression, permission to narrate, comes from the Palestinian leader and teacher from the Hudson Valley. Well, he's from Palestine, but he taught at Bard College in the Hudson Valley, Edward Said, that what the Palestinians want is permission to narrate. What the Jews want is permission to narrate. What Black people in our country and Native people and white people want is permission to narrate. Can we find a way to just have enough spaciousness in our world where there's permission to narrate? That is democracy, freedom of expression, freedom of speech. And one way that we can symbolize this at the Passover Seder is with the place for Elijah. Elijah is a shapeshifter. Elijah can appear in any form. So let's open our space to Elijah. I have set a full setting for Elijah, not just a cup. I want Elijah to sit at the table and show us how we can listen to everyone's narratives. We can shape shift like Elijah. Just seeing something else that really inspires from our tradition of coming out of exile, leaving Egypt, meaning leaving the exile of speech. This is from the Piaseczner Rebbe, the Rabbi Kalonymus Shapira from the Warsaw Ghetto, who was murdered at Auschwitz. He taught that every Jewish person at the Seder needs to feel inside ourselves and check if we are already out of Egypt. Only after that, only when we come out of that place of constriction, that place where it can be justified that babies are killed, only when we can come out of from within ourselves, that place that says, I'm compassionate here, but not there. Only then can we touch what he calls the refined above, which I think is really accepting liberation at the hands of the great liberator. And this is also connected in the Zohar, and it's where Reb Shapira, I believe, sourced this, that the significance of the fours in the Seder, right? 4 cups of wine, 4 phrases or verbs of redemption during Exodus. We can understand that as we're chewing and eating, we are transforming all 4 parts of our digestive systems. And only after that, after we've gone through total digestion of the pain and the trauma that we were subjected to in Mitzrayim, only then can we really fulfill the practice, the mitzvah of retelling this story. And we want to do that so that the day after Passover and after the 8 days, we're living in a new way. This is not just during Passover, right, that we want to relive and rechange, build on the past story. This is for our lives. And so the whole transformation of the matzah, right? It's the same ingredients as the chametz, right? The puffed up bread, right? The whole transformation of regular bread to matzah, regular bread to chametz, and then back as we come out of Passover. It's all about really digesting the healing power of matzah to give us humility. And I like to think of this capacity for humility as a medicine for shame, that we don't have to feel ashamed of what we did and what we don't know how to do or what we regret, that we want to take on this characteristic of humility that the matzah represents, that, yeah, I didn't know how to stop this. I didn't know how to build the freedom of my people, whoever you define as your people. I didn't know how to do that without costing that to someone else. And I feel regret, but I don't have to go to shame. I could just feel humble and say, all right, let me try something different. Let me hear other people's narratives. That is the humility, which becomes, according to some of the old Hasidic dynasties, that humility is actually the matzah. So it's not puffed up like bread, right? It's just the flatness. So that's something else we could do while we're eating and digesting matzah, which we do throughout the Seder, right? We can use it to metabolize from shame, embarrassment, horror, fear, to humility, to humility. The last one I'll talk about is just reminding us that when we tell the story of the plagues and we take a drop of wine out of our glasses, that the important part of that ritual, which I know we've lost because it gets very rousing, is that we're decreasing the wine drop by drop. So when we do this, we want our mindful attention, our meditation, if we're doing some of these as eating meditations, our meditation is on taking out a drop of wine from the cup and gently putting it on our saucer. Because what we're doing is we're taking some of our joy out. We're decreasing our own joy drop by drop as we recall the pain of the Egyptians, as we recall that our liberation was built on horrific acts of violence toward earth, toward other people, and to meditate as we decrease our joy. How can we tell this story differently? How can we do it differently? And can we find, as we go through all of these rituals of really taking in the cost of our liberation and how we're not free today, we're not out of danger. We need this humility to find other ways. We need this humility so we could all stay at the table, right? How can we find hope? How can we find hope? And I'm just going to leave that with our question. So just want to end with a blessing for all of us, that our Passover Seder really continues our journey to liberation as individuals and as peoples in a new way, that we can bring what our generation can bring to it. The possibility of liberation from sitting at the table, staying at the table, liberating our mouths so that we can speak to each other and find solutions to move forward together for a peaceful world. Thank you.